have just such a more, what's the word? Empathetic isn't the right word. It's just like, I also want to move empathetic out of my vocabulary because I'm like so fucking over everyone talking about everything.
It's not used properly, like literally 100% of the time.
No percent. All right, let's just hit it off. Lindsay,
What's up, Grace?
I'm so happy we're doing this.
Me too. Oh my god.
Okay, let me tell you why I brought you here. I am trying to take all the interesting TikTok conversations that happen and bring them into a space that's a little more nuanced, a little more long form, a little more like, okay, we can actually have a conversation and not just like little bits of everything in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
You have such interesting frameworks and thoughts and perspectives on this topic, which is social media raising entitled adults that are making our workforce hard to be in?
Oh,
What do you think?
this is such an important question, Grace. And you and I talk about this a lot, and you see it as a creator. The world of social media is not does not match the rules of work. These are really, really different. And the way that folks can behave and engage on social media, those social behaviors, most of them would not be acceptable in person, which I know you have so much to say about that. And we have to put a note down. We have to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
What I believe entitlement actually comes from is a lot of emotional support and coaching and not matching amount of standards and clarity. So you're trying to take care of people. You love them. Big-hearted managers do this all the time. I love my team. They're like my family. Oh, let's get their dog some dog biscuits. I love that. I'm not saying to not do that. I'm saying when that's out of balance with clarity and high standards, you end up with somebody who's entitled and confused about what is theirs. And all entitlement is, in my definition, is going like, I have no idea how this is supposed to work, but I'm sure they'll tell us when it's time. I'm sure they'll figure it out for us.
Yeah.
And that attitude drives managers nuts.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me what you think about that.
Well, I was just thinking, I think that's such an interesting frame to come at, which is entitlement. First of all, you just took the poison out of it. Like entitlement's such a barbed word.
Yes.
And by framing it as, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm sure someone will figure it out for us, is actually much more like, oh, this is something we can change. This is not something that's embedded in a human that is impossible to remove. Can you say where you get this from? So you have a coaching background.
I do.
You've been speaking for over a decade on generations in the workplace.
Yes. Yeah, it comes from my coaching frameworks, but it also comes from a book called 10 to 25, where we talk about what really motivates an individual, especially through those final stages of development, what motivates them to become high achieving. And what we find over and over is it's two factors: high standards and clarity of what's expected of me, and high support. And even if you and I look anecdotally at our lives, at the teachers, the basketball coaches, the people that fed us and helped us grow and stretch ourselves in like high school, you will find that combination that they really cared about you, but they also kept their standards high, and that pushed us past our own limits.
Yeah.
And oftentimes at work, I find that we've talked so much about empathy and team connection that we've taken our eye off of needing to be super clear. Then you fold in the concept of remote work, knowing full well that humans learn best by modeling and being around other humans. You're keeping humans in isolation, less clarity of what they're supposed to be doing, when and how, more emotional support. Of course, they're going to feel entitled. And I really don't see it as a character flaw. I see it as the result of the environment that they're put in. They do not have clear expectations, so they cannot reach your invisible expectations and blow your mind with their skills and talents because they don't know what you really expect of them.
The way that you framed it as sort of over-indexing on one thing to under-index on another makes it also feel so solvable.
Yes.
Which is why I love your take on this stuff. Because, and social media does this so easily, is like, the kids are getting clarity, by the way. They are getting information. They're just getting it from a source we may not agree with, or the
Right.
managers may not agree with. And I think there's a lot of like on social media, there's a lot of cognitive distortion behavior. There's a lot of this is all one thing and these people are all this thing. And despite Gen Z being sort of outwardly, and Gen Z is like the early generation in the workforce, they're getting picked on right now, but whatever.
Yes.
We'll get into that. But despite them sort of touting their tolerance, they actually test as one of the least tolerant generations alive.
Yep. That's fascinating. Okay, I have to hear from you though. Do you think social media is raising entitled adults?
Yes.
Okay, how is it doing it? What's
So
happening behind the
it's
curtain?
I think, well, I would have a different, like I would have had a different definition of entitlement before we talked, but now I'm going to steal yours and run with that. Um, I would have said it's because we live in the most, like we just have to call it what it is, the most physically privileged society as humans that we have ever lived in. The most physically privileged society that any generation has lived in. And so despite whether or not you yourself, the individual, has had a privileged upbringing, we live in the most privileged society. And so because it's this really weird dichotomy on social media of there's all this privilege and everyone's looking at this on their phone that is $1,200. Like the phones are at minimum maybe $700, like really expensive pieces of equipment that the equivalent, there was nothing children were walking around with equivalently in other generations where it was as ubiquitous as it is. And so they're on the phone and the phone is telling them you're oppressed, your world is falling apart, everything is bad, everything is toxic, and you're helpless and there's nothing you can do. And so what I find is just this like monstrous, you know, soup of traits of people who have so much privilege. They have never used the bathroom in an outhouse in the middle of the night, and it shows. Okay. And they don't realize they have privilege, and on top of that, so they're not grateful for it. And then on top of that, they feel like they're somehow getting the short end of the stick.
And think about what I hear you actually saying is they're receiving misinformation. They're not getting the short end of the stick. They're holding a $1,200 device that connects them to the world. It's that the narratives and the stories that are put in front of them are really contagious. You know, we talk about social and emotional contagion. We're watching these things and we start to assimilate it into our life without even knowing it. And then we think that's reality. And we look out into the physical world and we use that lens of like, I'm powerless. And then that's what you see out in the world. Perception is so powerful. And this shapes your perceptions. So that's the piece where it's like, this is so powerful. It may be too powerful for you to process and separate from reality.
Well, I did a video a couple weeks ago where I was like, if you're under 25, I think your phone should be locked up at work. And it did get a lot of backlash. But what I think is really interesting, I'm curious if this happens for you too, because you see so many generations when you're speaking to huge crowds.
Yeah.
When I'm online, especially if anyone's coming in at like 23, 24, I can kind of tell that age. I want to punch them in the throat. They're so annoying. When I'm in person with them, when I'm doing workshops, I'm like, I love you. You're amazing. You're so fun. You're so open. You're so ready to go. Like it is, I just have such a different experience with in-person people, same demo, same age, same concerns, and social media people. And so then I'm, whether correctly or not, attributing some of that to like the influence the social media has.
That's so interesting. Do you think that folks, when they're on social media with you, they're more like antagonistic? Like you would never say that to my face, but you're willing to put it in the comments?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Did you ever watch Love is Blind?
I'm literally watching it right now, of course.
Okay, I didn't watch this season. I heard it was so boring.
We fast forwarded through about half of it.
Okay. It is more fun to watch it with someone else.
Oh yeah.
I feel like you gotta like have a partner in crime to watch it with.
100%.
remember the season where it was Jessica? Oh, I can't even remember their names. I other people's names, but she was talking about how the guy who rejected her, she was like, when he sees me, he's gonna choke.
Yeah.
That's how I feel because of the way my workshops go, because of the way like I get reactions at speeches. When people are so crazy to me online, I'm like, if you were with me in person, you would fucking choke.
I love it. You know what I think happens sometimes? I think when we're online, people really do objectify us.
Mm-hmm.
Objectify as in,
Not in the fun way. I'm kidding.
yeah, not in the cool way. Like, don't objectify me, but like, I'm a real human over here with like family and rescue dogs and normal everyday stressors. And the way that you're approaching me is like I'm a character in a movie. Like you haven't really, and I think this happens to your point, especially in reality TV. I was watching Love is Blind reunion, and that was one thing that several of the people said. They're like, hey guys, we're real people.
Yeah.
I know that you watched us for entertainment, but that was my heart breaking on television. That was my lived experience. Like these are real, hard, life-changing experiences, and you're like watching it for entertainment. Now it's kind of on them because that's like what we signed up for. There's been 8 seasons. Come on. But I think that happens to influencers online all the time.
Yeah.
You're like a character in their brain, not quite like a 4-dimensional being.
I completely agree. And I'm like, I just have a little, audience comparatively, but I feel like it happens more with the people who disagree with you, where you become this. Are you familiar with Terry Real's work?
Who?
Terry Real?
No.
Oh, you would love him. I won't go into it then, but it's this idea of like when you're in a relationship with someone and you're in conflict with them, when you're in conflict with them, out pops their like shadow version. The version of them that it's like Grace is like a cold, silent, condescending bitch, you know? And like that, and when you're in conflict, you're like, back. She's back.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's what people do to people they see a lot online also is like you have the shadow version where the minute they start saying something you don't agree with, you're like, oh, bitch is back.
I think you're onto something there. I do. There's so many parts of us that show up at different times, and it's ironic that somebody would tell you on like your TikTok platform, like you've oversimplified something and you only had 3 minutes. It's like this platform only allows for oversimplification, which means you also oversimplify me as a human.
Right. I feel like I'm, whether fruitlessly or not, constantly in my comments trying to correct the cognitive distortions that just naturally come with social media.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that happens is people come in really hot with this, you know, and it's because I see it in the workplace. I'm getting complaints about it in the workplace, so I'm like, okay, well, let's start here. I'm already doing these workshops. Like, let's start in the home front. And they come in really hot with something, and then you answer them hot. Like if I answer with a video response, people are so pissed. I think you've seen 1 or 2 of those. People are fucking pissed. They'll go like 8 comments, like because they're like, how come you're picking on me? Well, hun, if you didn't want a response, maybe you shouldn't have left that comment.
Yeah. Thinking that they were like in the shadows, that you would never actually address them as a person. So maybe it also depersonalizes the user, the watcher.
100%. Well, I think that depersonalization, then that's an interesting thing that I also see show up in work. And I don't know if this is still under the umbrella of entitled or not. What I see happening is like in the Slack channels, in the Teams channels, the kind of behavior that people are used to using on social media.
Yeah.
Where like you say something, Lindsay, and I think it's like crazy or something. Instead of DMing you, I'm going to go right under you on Slack and be like, does it feel like people are getting a little ridiculous with their comments today? Like, who said you could act like that?
Yeah.
Like, what gives you?
Well, and that's the thing. You actually answered the question in your rhetorical question is like, who said you could do that? No one and everyone. The
Yeah.
lack of clarity of how to behave down
Oh,
to
you
the
brought it back.
granular,
That was so smooth. Yeah.
down to that granular level. If you don't tell somebody exactly how you expect them to be or what is required for them to have this job, the chances that they're going to miss the mark is 99.9%. And there's this idea in our mind that like you shouldn't do that, that hurts the other person, that's rude or that's not kind. And if you show it to a Gen Z, they might be like, they're just talking, I don't know what the big deal is, they won't even see it the same way.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, do you think that this kind of shift happened like all of a sudden? Do you think it's always been here, like that younger employees don't really know what's going on in the workplace and now it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, this drift between generations and perceptions of work because of social media? Do you think it's moving quicker?
Oh, I feel like you're teeing me up for such a great response here. I'll take it. We're both batting.
Wait, I can't bat to you. I'm supposed to pitch it to you. Hold on. Here we go.
Yeah. Well, I really like Jean Twenge's research and Jonathan Haidt's research, which talks about in the 90s there was this just massive shift in how we raised kids.
Yep.
And it was less of the alone figuring stuff out in the neighborhood, figuring stuff out. It was like alone with the parents. And then 10, 12 years later, it was alone with the parents and then alone in your room on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a whole host of skills, like what I teach, the soft skills, that used to be common sense because we observed them and then they were reinforced. And there's just a generation that a bunch of kids just missed that. Like they didn't have any place to observe them and then they weren't reinforced. My parents are Irish Catholic, grew up in the Bronx. Like I had less of this, but certainly in my young years with my parents' friends, if I was misbehaving, I was parented by a lot of other people's parents.
Oh yeah.
Not just my own.
Yep.
Were you?
Well, yeah. And I think the thing is, I was thinking about current day because we have our kids hang out with us and our adult friends a lot so that they can learn these give and takes. But of course, today you don't correct anybody else's kids. But when we were growing up, that would be normal for somebody not your parent to have a word with you. Yeah.
And it was how people learned.
Yeah.
So then all these things that you learn, like, don't knock over an elderly person on their way in the door, hold the door for them.
Yeah.
You learn because you think it's common sense, but you learned it at some point and it was reinforced at some point. And so if no one's learning and no one's reinforcing it, then it actually never becomes common sense. And so all these things that we think are just rational are just observed and reinforced behaviors.
Yes, you nailed it. A lot of this is that we were quietly modeling and being modeled for. Modeling is the most potent, efficient way to teach a human to do almost anything. And modeling is like, you come with me, I'm going to show you. And from there, you'll be able to do it yourself.
Yeah.
That is way quicker than reading a book. It's way quicker than taking a class. It's rich with mirror neuron opportunities. It's rich with observational opportunities. And you're exactly right. If we're spending our free time alone in our room, if our kiddos, today's Gen Zs or even Gen Alphas, are spending that time alone in their room, they're missing the thousands of little interactions that teach them how to interact with other people socially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to that, I do think there's a big gap. And then I think remote work made it 1,000 times worse for that generation. And then also took any muscle that anyone else had, people who've now been remote for 5 years. Our brains are, oh, God, it'd be so good if I could think of the word. Flexible. That wasn't the word. What's the word?
Agile. Our brains are,
I don't know.
Elastic. Growth.
Yeah, like malleable. Like you need. It's like a muscle, right?
Yeah.
There's things that you need to learn. There's things you need to keep up with, and so a lot of people's like social muscles degraded.
Yes.
Really hard.
Yeah, I think that's what folks get confused about. Is almost all social behavior is learned and takes practice. You can't just say this is how you're supposed to be, so be that way. And I bet most of us, even in our own lives, remember. Do you remember when we had been in isolation in 2020 during COVID, and then we went back into the public? And at first, it was kind of weird. You're like, "How do I talk?" Like, you get groceries, and you're like, "Hello, is this how I walk in public? Is this how I talk to people?" Like, you're exactly right, and we can see it in global research that certain elements of soft skills, because we weren't in practice with them, just like you don't go for a jog every day, it's going to be tough to huck out that 10K. It's very similar. Our social skills, and they're meant to be flexible so that humans can continue to adapt inside of their environment or the people that they're around. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the big, like, I'm hawking a solve that I think is a decent solve for, you know, wherever we get, but I don't know what like the big answer is. And I don't think it's shut down social media. I don't think it's like no one ever works remote again. But
Yeah.
these are certainly two things that contribute.
So do you think, you mentioned this, I'm curious, social media plus remote work plus coming right out of college going into remote work is a dangerous combination for a career? Can you
I
talk a
think,
little bit about it?
well, I would say I'd be so interested to your take on this.
Mhm.
I would say forget career. It's a dangerous combination for a human brain.
Even better.
It's like the worst of all things you could do. It's bad for your brain. It's bad for your relationships. It's bad for your job. It's bad for your career. It's bad for whoever you're in relation. It's just bad in relationship with. It's just bad.
Did I ever tell you that I used to do like prison work?
No.
I used to go into prisons and spend time playing music, like just spend time, especially women's and men's prisons, but I got more time with women in prisons. And you know what they always said? The worst thing that can happen is getting put in isolation, getting
Yeah.
put in by themselves because they violated some rule or pissed somebody off enough where they're now in isolation. And I read some literature on this, and many people would say putting somebody in solitary confinement is inhumane because ultimately, do you know what the brain does if you're in isolation too much? It's not getting enough stimulation, so it starts to hallucinate and it
Mm.
loses its footing in reality because humans are made to co-regulate. We help each other find reality. Even the things that you and I do, we help each other solve business problems. Like there's a lot of interaction
Yeah.
that keeps us kind of grounded in this plane.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is people come out of that and they're hallucinating, they've lost footing in reality, they actually come out uh, less grounded and they're in a worse place. We have to kind of like recover their mental health when you put them into isolation like that. And so solitary confinement, often people will say like it's inhumane, it shouldn't be done. It's not even if you like are, if it's just a quiet environment and it's not rattling them all the time, it's still inhumane. And think about when you're working remote, you can go a whole day. I'm not trying to compare prison, by the way, and atrocities of the American prison system and remote work. It's just when you take any human and put and isolate them, it's hard to stay footed in reality and feel grounded and connected to other people. And you have to try harder to be connected. It's not just going to happen.
I love that metaphor. So I don't want to take you off on this tangent, but I do my like one of my like tin hat dreams is all prisons are like rehabilitation centers where it's like play and music and meditation and exercise and cooking classes and instead of what it is now.
100%. And as somebody who has spent well over 100 hours in prisons, it is gutting to watch and to understand like this is really not okay. Any version of this is not helping people
Yeah.
feel more integrated and be a part of society in a way that feels fulfilling to them and helpful for all.
Yeah.
It's true. So I could totally go off on that rant too.
That's interesting. I want a side note on that.
Yeah,
That's
put a pin in it.
Well, okay, so to that end about people being divorced from reality, I think what happens on social then, this hits on one of my very favorite things that you have an opinion on,
Mhm.
which is everyone's really, really horny about their boundaries.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's true.
It's
This
like,
is a boundary for me.
yeah. It's like in the absence of pro-social behaviors, in the absence of learning how to interact with people in a way that's productive, everyone's decided via like Instagram and their favorite meme releaser is that boundaries are the way to have productive relationships with everyone else.
Yep.
Can you speak a little to that?
Oh my gosh. So boundaries are sneaky sneaks because sometimes people use them to control other people. So they think they're calling their power back to themselves and being reasonable, but they're actually telling somebody else how they have to behave. And a true boundary is only saying, this is what I'm going to do if you do that. Grace, you're free to do that. I'm just not going to join you. I'm not going to do that's my boundary. And that's instead, if it's like, hey, if you do that, we're going to have a problem. Or if you do that, it's like a veiled threat that we're calling a boundary. And so think about how you're putting these weird levers in your relationships instead of owning your life. You're asking other people to change so you can be comfortable in your life.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets kind of sideways. And I've seen creators do this, creators where they'll say like, if you disagree with me, you need to unfollow me. And it's like, you're asking somebody else to do your work.
Yeah.
To do your boundary work. Why don't you just go unfollow the people you don't like? You have the freedom to do that. Block them. Do whatever you want. So I think it's tricky because we all, on some level, I believe, and based on triangulation and different types of transactional theory, I think all of us want to be rescued in some way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of us that really wants somebody else to rescue us and do the work.
Yeah.
And all of us also want to feel powerful.
Yeah.
And when we are not aware of how we're kind of vacillating between those deep desires, our boundaries get sideways.
Mm.
What do you think about boundaries? I'm curious. What are some misconceptions that you see happen on social?
Well, I think one of our first conversations, you said something about this, and I was like, oh, what a light bulb. I just felt like it's over. Oh my god, my hair keeps doing this crazy thing. I'm really playing with mousse right now, and it's I don't know. It's has a lot of memory. I think I find the usage of them to just be inherently ignorant to the purpose of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I also think I don't know. I see in people's usage of them such a lack of agency, such a lack of personal agency, such a lack of like. And this is social media perpetuates this, you know, as I said, like this, you're a helpless victim at the mercy of all these other sources.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess, you know, if I were to try and put myself in the shoes, if I feel like a little mouse on a boat in a storm and that's it, and that's all I know, I can't even row the boat because I'm too little. Like, if that's what I am, then yeah, I guess I have to just figure out a way to put a boundary around myself so I'm safe.
Yeah. Yeah, socially.
Yeah, but no one's really that little mouse.
Have you heard this phrase, like, everybody wants to be in a village, but no one wants to be a villager?
Recently, it's been making the rounds.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of what you're talking about, the discernment of the give and take of being in community. Yeah. Like, we all want somebody to come to our art show, but when our neighbor asks us to come to the swim meet for their kid, we're like, I don't have the time for that. And there's this inherent rugged individualism that's in U.S. culture.
Very much so.
That tells us like, I'm an island, I'm self-made, and then we know even research from Malcolm Gladwell all the way to ancient philosophers, that's not true. You know, everybody that you meet that's wildly successful, their X factor is that they have awesome social connections. They're connected to other people. They never made it alone. And that idea that you can't make it alone is not rooted in reality or research. Yeah. And so that's that piece of what am I willing to, if I want connection, support, engagement from my community, am I willing to do the same for somebody else? And I know this is like a little esoteric, but it's the same thing. Like if I'm going to be in Grace's life and we do disagree about things. And it's like, if I want her to be gracious with me, I'm going to be gracious to her too. Like that's just kind of really base. And I think we're beyond that. But just this idea of if I'm going to comment and be snarky in your comment section, you're also mirroring my snarkiness and coming back and meeting me there. And then I'm offended that you responded to me. Like that doesn't work. So treat people on social media how you'd want to be treated. I think it'd be a great lesson if everybody had to make a video and get pummeled, absolutely pummeled by trolls, to realize like how not cool and how sick it is to do that to other people.
First of all, the thought of you writing a snarky comment in my comments just like sent me like giggling off in my head over here.
I couldn't do it if I tried. What can we say? I'm a tigger.
I'd love to see it.
I'm like wagging my tail over here. I'm going to try now. I'm really going to try to be snarky. We'll see.
I can't even say. I can't even. This is too long of a side note. Yeah, Grace and I had such a long joke about this the other day. Okay. So what's interesting about the community? Okay, what I want to tie the community, the lack of community. I also saw something along this line where someone was like, the price of being a part of a community is being annoyed. Like,
yes.
It's the same thing where people do have this. I want people to show up for me. I want them to, but like everyone annoys me and everyone has to like. Okay, do you feel like people have more of an obsession with control right now?
100.
Why?
Because all the technology and the way we build communities tells you have more control than you really do.
I find it so nuts because I'm like, this area, you're so hyper focused on control. You don't have any. This area where you're letting yourself be the little mouse on the boat, you have all the control over here.
Yes.
It's like such a crazy, like the Eye of Sauron is completely in the wrong place.
You're exactly right. How do you teach people? Is it discernment? Is that what word would you use to retrain people's thought processes to assess, is this actually my control or not? Is this a boundary or is it not? What does that type of training look like?
I think it goes back to what you said at the beginning. I actually did something like this morning with a client, where it's not quite, it's a little bit in the family of control. These senior leaders were not taking ownership of senior relationships the way they needed to. They were kind of just being receptive, and the stakeholder on the other end was like, I don't have enough trust in this relationship. And so what we did, like as a thought exercise, was map out who needs to be connected to who, at what level do they need to be connected to them, and then what does it look like to be connected to that person at that level. So doing what you said, which is like, what are our standards here?
Yes.
I think that's the only way you do it. I don't know. Do you have any other ideas?
No. I mean, I think the work that I do that I'm most interested in is self-awareness, like relationship with self and self-awareness. And so this is probably because of the way I was raised, the gaps that I've had to fill in over 40 years to like be just where I am today, comfortable in my skin. And so I always think about what you were saying. We perceive this is out of our control, but this is in my control. And it's actually usually flip-flopped.
Yeah.
I think taking folks through some cognitive behavioral therapy exercises, separating perception from reality for folks, helping people actually externalize their internal thoughts so we don't realize that we're actually directing our behavior through the mind. We just kind of do what we do.
Well said.
So those are the areas that I like to spend a lot of time on, because we don't realize that there's like, this is, I don't mean to be creepy or like talk about aliens or anything weird, but like there's another being that's observing and watching you be a human.
Yeah.
And you can be that being. Are you the observer of your life?
Or higher self.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so am I able to like settle my vagus nerve, settle my system, my nervous system responses, and be the observer and come above and administer compassion to myself, understanding, make space for my emotions so that I'm not constantly just reactive, reactive, reactive. Until we can do that, which is kind of an executive functioning skill, which usually takes until you're about 25, until you're able to do that, be exposed to that and learn those skills, I think it's hard to discern what's really in your control and what's not. I think we get really jumbled up because the mind is storyteller. Our brain is storytelling all the time.
What a good point. So if someone's under 25, what do? They got to work, they got to live, they got to be in community.
It's, I 100% agree with you.
And you have teenagers.
That I do. And I 100%, everything that you share, I actually put through the lens of my 20-year-old. And the idea of putting your phone away and being in person at an office would make that uphill battle go from like a 14,000 footer or, like a huge mountain to a hill.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things is that this distorts reality.
Yeah.
And if you take this as like gospel truth, you won't really be living on this plane enough. You'll be time traveling all the time. It's really not good for your psyche, which you shared earlier. Yeah. And so I think a lot of it has to do with eliminate some of these distractions. If you're under 25, lock up your phone and be present at work. Those types of ideas of how to help humans flourish by creating an environment that allows them to tune into their higher self. I think that's a big part of it. What do you think?
As my phone's like obnoxiously buzzing in the corner, I was just trying to keep our notes open. I agree. I don't know. I think everyone's going to have to, I'm putting under no serve. Everyone's going to have to figure it out themselves. I'm still figuring it out. I'm 35. I'm like, my phone definitely fucks up my work day sometimes. The ability to like be unregulated, just go this way, do a deep dive into the phone, and then be like, I knew it. I knew that was toxic behavior. Like, I'm not immune to that.
Totally.
A Reiki teacher this week told me to sleep with mouth tape so that my vagus nerve gets a lot more like attention during the night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's like this.
2 nights in, I like it.
You like it?
I like it.
Aren't you afraid that your nose is going to get stuffy and then you're going to be like,
no, because you kind of like, I look like a thing from The Ring, like that, like thing, but it's because it's black, but it's like it's not like duct tape.
Okay. I'm going to need a picture, but okay.
There's like really cute ones. I just got one off Amazon. Anyway, I think when I was under 25, I didn't have enough internal locus of control to be able to address any of this. And I was a little mouse in a boat, and I felt like a little mouse in a boat, and I was waiting for someone to come pluck me out of the boat and be like, Grace, you're amazing. Here's your career, and here's your life path. And I didn't even have social media to reinforce that for me.
Yeah.
Like if I had social media where I was watching people be like, all of a sudden I posted one video and then 10 million views later, now I make $20,000 a month. Like, I wouldn't be here talking to you like this probably. I don't know where I'd be.
I know.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. And what you just described is what I consider entitlement. The experience of entitlement. Like, will somebody come save me and help me?
Yeah.
And then 40-year-olds are like, get it together, kid. But we're not, you don't even know what that would mean. One of the things I like to share, it comes from anthropology research. I'm sure you've heard of this, like the rite of passage. That's in most different types of people groups. They have a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. And it's usually...
I was just reading about this. I'm just trying to change my lighting. It's fine.
Oh, sure. Okay. So something that I borrow from the world of anthropology is this concept of a rite of passage. For a lot of people groups, it's during puberty, from turning from like a boy to a man, a girl to a woman. It has to do with reproduction in the community, all that.
Sure.
And if you think about U.S. culture, we don't have anything like that. I think the closest thing we have is college, where we're like, you're now, going from childhood to adulthood. And we kind of stair step people with like dorms where they have RAs and they have professors looking out for them and they have, services on campus. They're not really like, get out into the world, kids. They do have like a gentle movement that takes 4 years. But I think we are missing this moment where we say, welcome to the adult world. The rules have changed. We're going to teach you the rules. You're going to go through a ceremony, go into isolation, meet with the people that can teach you the new way, and then you're going to come out transformed, and we're all going to see you differently. And we all agree that we perceive you as an adult now. Because we don't have that, and because of the way the developmental psychology works, you do have Gen Zs coming into the workforce, especially if they're under 25, where they're like, wait, am I a kid or am I an adult? Are y'all going to predict my needs and take care of me? Are you going to listen to me or am I listening to you?
Yeah.
Well, what I know from college is that my professors listen to me. I get extra points if I raise my hand and speak up and push back. And now if I do any of those things, you guys are pissed at me. It's a very confusing kind of moment in our developmental psychology, overlaid by like capitalism and like the timing of how we raise kids and all of that. And so if I could change anything, I would have a rite of passage experience where somebody actually knows what it's going to take to live in this new world. Maybe it's an internship, maybe it's the way you onboard, but I think it's really, really important and we're missing it. And you lose years of your life in angst and stress when you don't need to be.
I was going to ask you what that looks like, but you answered that question. But I want to know, like, what an onboarding is. That like 6? You know what? Probably a poorly done version is, but like if you're at JP Morgan and they have a year, it's like the trainees, like you come in for a year, but they're not doing our stuff. They're doing whatever else is going on.
Right. And now you're getting called in to help with those things from your position, but that's like this is the meat of, we haven't really taught them social norms in these power dynamics where you're no longer a customer of the college or a student of the high school. You are expected to be on the other side.
Yeah.
What would you put in a rite of passage based on what we're talking about? What would you do to create like this moment? What elements do you think somebody needs to cross over from being perceived as a child to like a viable adult in the workplace?
So I think it would have to have 3 elements.
Okay.
One is a resetting of expectation. So something I like to do is show a video of scrolling through work talk on Instagram for 2 minutes. Have I showed you that video?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. And then go, okay, wipe your brain clean. You've never been in work before. What are some norms? You watch this video. What are some norms? So I like to do something like that where we're going, let's just be really meta for a second about the world we're living in and what it's teaching us. Okay. Now, knowing that this is our starting point, we're going to start to move more towards a direction of reality. So that's point 1, which is let's set some parameters for what we believe reality to be closer to. Now, everyone has a different experience, of course, but let's just set some expectations. Then 2, I think there has to be, it's such an interesting moment in time. There's so much information available. There's so much media. There's so much this. It's so chaotic for people about what should be expected from them. And so I think there has to be a setting of like, what's expected from you. And it's not that you're going to have an idea that makes the company $20 million. It's also not that you're going to sit here and be on your phone all day. Like, what is expected of you in this situation? And then finally, I think the third piece would be hearing from other people who walked the road. Do you watch the Apple TV show with Catherine Hahn, The Witch's Road?
I love it. Do you need me to sing?
Yes.
Oh
it was so good, right?
I'm obsessed.
It was so good. I can't think of the tune right now. We'll get
down the road, down the witch's road, down. Okay, you didn't harmonize, so
that. Well, no, I wasn't going to. I didn't. So this idea that there's people who walk the road in front of you,
Yeah.
and that's probably one of my favorite part of workshops is we'll be working on a soft skill. We'll do some activity around it. And I like to have a mixed group. I like to have the young people and I like to have their executives in the room. And then we'll talk about like, oh, how do you manage up when you've made a huge mistake? Okay. And then what happens is the executives in the room go, yeah, when I was 24, when I was 30, 2 years ago, I did this and this is how it played out and this would happen and this is what I do differently. And so this idea of you start to get actual input from people you sit next to and work with and interact with, and not fucking people on here who you don't know, who are not accountable to you, who you don't interact with. You sort of get actual real world input from people about their lives. And so that's what I think those would be sort of 3 critical things that you would need to do in that program.
That's so good. That is so good, Grace. I'm like writing this down and gonna send it back to you.
Should we design one?
I think that's what's happening right now. Because there's this element of exactly what you said, like acknowledging that you have a specific set of expectations, a worldview, you have a concept of what you think this is going to be. And the heartbreaking part and the part that makes high achievers crumble is that no one is saying, I know this is what you think it is. I know it's social media makes it look like you're going to make 20 grand on Etsy month 1. And I know that. Now let's really put this into language and a framework that we can push back off of and observe. And now let's talk about what it really is with the people that you actually work with, that you're accountable to. Yeah. That's so powerful. And these experiences are not happening. I create them, you create them, but they're not just going to happen at work because they're they take time. They make a huge difference. They're like a huge invisible lever if you pull it.
Yep. You were just finishing the thought on it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, it doesn't happen unless somebody inserts that into somebody's life, because it's such a big brain shift. It's such a different way of seeing the world. Worldviews don't change just like because you think they should. You really have to. And I know this because I came from kind of cult exposure, cult living, that like high control religious groups, that until I really had space to push back and it's safe people to look at that space and say, now, is this really reality? Does this even serve me? Until I was able to deconstruct my life, I was miserable. And it took exactly what you said, somebody farther down the road to help me put new pieces in place to construct a reality that actually worked for me and the people around me. So this happens.
You just dropped such an interesting hook, like right at the last minute of our
podcast. And goodbye.
You're like, I will take no questions on that. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I guess we'll just have to do a part 2. Okay, love Lindsay, where can the 12 people who are going to watch this, where can they find you?
Those 12 people can go to my name, lindsaybocardo.com. Easy.
And they can book you for what? Well, this onboarding program you're going to build?
Obviously, this partnership that we are creating, this deliverable with. Yeah, you can book trainings, you can do some coaching, we can do keynotes. Most of my time is spent on keynote stages now. I work inside of a few companies that I really love to do this type of work. Grace and I do very similar work in different ways. And I still coach some teams, especially when you have high achievers coming out of college and you want them to knock it out of the park their first 18 months. It's very helpful to have a guide.
That's awesome.
How about you, Grace? Where can people find you?
They can find me if they click on this channel. They can find me. My website also, my name, gracemccarrick.com. Thank you. No one ever throws it back to the host. That's so cute.
I'm trying to be cute today.
And TikTok, which is probably where the 12 people are coming from.
Hello. Now just return to TikTok.
Back to your scroll.